It's like genetics tells me the dementia can't happen. Me cause multiple chronic conditions because I don't have this first line of defense in my gut. And that one thing changed my life. This is why 80% of dementia cases are in women, because women make toxic estrogens that most men don't.
I am excited to introduce Kashif Khan to everyone here today. Kashif is a best-selling author of The DNA Way, a celebrity longevity coach, founder of the DNA Company, and 2 times TEDx speaker. Kashif is a pioneer in driving the functional approach to genomic interpretation, overlaying environment, nutrition, and lifestyle on the genetic blueprint to create personalized longevity plans. Now, as Kashif dove into the field of functional genomics, it was revealed that his neural wiring was actually genetically designed to be entrepreneurial. However, his genes also revealed a particular sensitivity to pollutants, identifying the root cause of his faltering health. This inspired Kashif to rid himself of 5 chronic diseases and eventually build a global brand to help thousands of other people. Welcome to the summit, my friend.
Pleasure, man. What you're doing here is great. Really, really need it. So happy to be here.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. Hey there. Sorry to jump in here, but really important. At the end of this video, there's a link that gives you access to a bonus package we put together that has all sorts of great resources. Pro-level notes, audio downloads, a fast start guide, as well as some additional resources from our speakers. You will not want to miss out on that. You can also find the link in the description below or at gotmoldsummit.com. So go claim yours today. Now back to the interview. Now, you've interviewed me a few times. So it's fun to turn the microphone around here.
Yeah, this is odd. I'm ready to fire off the first question, but that's not what we're doing today.
No, I know. It's so funny, right? It's like muscle memory. So let's jump right in. I happen to know very little about this subject matter. So I've been looking forward to this for a long time, quite frankly. So educate me, but also educate our audience. What does everybody need to know about genetics?
So I think that what people believe is possible is somewhat obsolete, the general thinking around genetics, and there's a lot more possible now. So the thinking is I can go get my genome sequenced and find out that I have an 80% propensity to breast cancer and a 90% propensity to dementia, and I'm clear on other things. And then what? And then I'm kind of left with the anxiety that will induce the dementia to begin with because of the stress caused from learning this news and nothing to do about it. So that was genetics. Genetics was, what does each gene mean, right? And we had to start there. We had to first sequence the human genome, which actually only got completed last year. Last year, we fully completed this multi-decade, many billion-dollar project, and we now know of the 22,000 genes, what do they all mean? The majority of it is noise that we don't need to understand. The functional genes drive the main pathways that drive chronic disease, aging, energy levels, all of the main issues we're dealing with. And those cannot be interpreted as single siloed genes. And that's what's broken right now. So even people testing for those functional genes, knowing that they're important, like your hormones are important, your metabolism is important, your detox pathways are important, subject matter at hand, mold, for example, how do you detoxify it, right? They were not being interpreted as per human biology. So that's where functional genomics comes in, which is, of these 22,000 genes, there's really only 100 that we care about. And of those 100, we don't report on them as this gene means this gene means that. So if I take, to wrap it all up, and we could probably end this conversation here, we could save you an hour, which is, if I go back to, you have an 80% chance of Alzheimer's, good luck, which is genetics. To me, that's the starting point. You have a priority around dementia. This is a red flag. Now we need to investigate and figure out what's going to drive it. And if I can tell you that, now I've given you something actionable, which is useful information. What drives it? Neural inflammation of the brain, which then leads to cholesterol, this hormone, being deployed and sent to the brain to reduce the inflammation. It's like a Vaseline smoothing out damage, right? And then the same stuff, the free radicals, the toxins, whatever caused the inflammation to begin with, also oxidize that cholesterol and cause it to harden and deposit and build up a plaque. And amyloid plaque is one of the first early indicators of cognitive decline. And so what would cause that? Your gut. If your gut genetics aren't the best, and that is highly implicit when it comes to mold and mycotoxins, then you may end up with a leaky gut, which then leads to toxic substrates exiting your gut wall, crossing your blood-brain barrier, causing leaky brain and brain inflammation. It could be your metabolic pathways, your insulin response, the way you metabolize starches. There's genes that drive each one of those things. And if your diet isn't aligned to your genome, you can be in metabolic failure, causing dementia. It could be your hormones. This is why 80% of dementia cases are in women, because women make toxic estrogens that most men don't, which also cause brain inflammation. Women go into menopause and lose their estrogens, this brain protective hormone. It falls off a cliff at a certain age, and then they don't have the protection, and also they get dementia. So there's more reasons, but to me, this is how the tool is meant to be used. It's like genetics tells me dementia. Okay, now we start the journey of figuring out functional pathways that are broken that would be the cause. And if I support those with simple environment, nutrition, lifestyle, the dementia can't happen, because without inflammation, it's just not possible. And that's where we're at now today.
So, I mean, it's kind of a given that the idea here is really to avoid inflammation whenever and wherever possible. But if you've got a predisposition, what I'm hearing from you is that that this becomes a front and center priority.
Yeah, of the top 15 killers in North America, 14 are rooted in inflammation.
Wow.
And of those 15, the other one that's not rooted in inflammation is the number 3 cause of death, which is medical error. A doctor making a mistake, which is usually drug related, which is usually also related to inflammation. So you can say all 15 are caused by inflammation. So if you don't have this, name the top 15 diseases, of which, we have a $4 trillion healthcare budget, 3.6 trillion, 90% is spent on chronic disease management, things that we don't have to have. And that's all inflammation. So now exactly what you said, the reason, the exposure, the risk is different for different people. What would cause that cellular damage, the bad terrain of the body, which allows disease to settle in? That's where we really have to focus on, is not the disease itself, but why does the body fail and allow this disease to manifest that it had been fighting off for so many years prior to that?
So what you end up seeing is, here are the chinks in the armor, so to speak. This is as it stands today. And then we focus on reducing the risk factors associated with amplifying or accelerating that decline, right, in terms of diet and lifestyle. Yeah.
So take me as an example. Why am I even doing what I do? I don't have the academic background. Meanwhile, I have a curriculum where academics take it to learn what they didn't learn in school, because school taught them genetics. It didn't teach them functional genomics, how to apply this stuff. So what did I learn? Several years ago, I had 5 chronic conditions, right? I had eczema to the point where I couldn't open my eye. I had psoriasis. I had gut issues. I had migraines, depression. Actually, there was a number 6. There was also reflux, so couldn't eat much. So I had multiple doctors, multiple pills, and I kept asking the question, like, why? What did I do wrong? I'd never been sick prior to this, and then all of a sudden I have 5 different problems, and I couldn't get that answer. And I realized that that's not what they did. What they did was tell you what the thing is called and what pill to take, and just manage it. And so I started to figure out myself why. And this is fast forwarding a year and a half of discovering myself, led me to learning that I was missing a gene called GSTM1. So we know that there's variants, mutations. There's also something they call a copy number variation, which is a functional sort of variant, which most genetic testing companies don't look for, because it's more comprehensive, a deeper dive that you have to do. And it's how many copies of the gene did I get? And for the GSTM1, I got 0. And that gene is highly protective of the gut. It drives glutathione, this master antioxidant that removes nonsense that's not supposed to be in your body. And this particular gene does it in the gut. And so me, spending time in the city at where my office was, having lunches outside almost daily, thinking that I was eating healthy stuff, right? One of the big culprits for me was I ate a lot of hummus, thinking that I was eating a Mediterranean diet and it was good for me, right? And not knowing that it takes some pretty potent toxic chemicals to dry chickpeas fast enough so that they can flip that yield quicker, so that the commercial hummus shelves are always stocked, right? And that stuff, my business partner, no problem. Me, cause multiple chronic conditions because I don't have this first line of defense in my gut. And that one thing changed my life. Literally, I could not function. I could not work. I had crazy migraines. And that one thing taught me exactly what dial to turn. It was food and supporting glutathione, right? Supporting this masculine antioxidant with supplements, amongst a few other things. And 80% of my problems were gone.
Wow.
Right. And then I started fine tuning, to give you an example of outcome. When I started this journey, I was 38 years old and I started learning about all these functional tests. So I did some biological age testing and I was 43. So I was 5 years older than myself. I was aging myself prematurely. I now am 44, just turned 44, and I'm biologically 33.
Wow.
Right. So it's not just stop the problem. It's not just improve. It's also reverse time. If you start to learn how to support your biology and give your body exactly what it needs.
Are there any universal suggestions, or is it completely bespoke?
Well, it's yes to both because of the nature of the world we live in. There's universal threats that we all have to think about, which if we go down this journey of healing somebody, we have a very different path today than we did during our research phase. And just so everyone knows, once I had this aha moment, I literally walked away from my business. I had a marketing company that helped startups. Toronto, where I live, there's a lot of technology startups. So I used to help them grow. And I literally handed the keys to my business partner and said, keep it. I found what I need to work on. This is my legacy now. And so I started this research, which was direly needed, which was how do we take what was already known in genetics and apply it, and that required sitting with people and actually working on them. That was the gap that was missing academically. So I spent 3 years with 7,000 patients, one by one, fixing them. And that's how we learned what all these environment, nutrition, lifestyle interventions needed to be based on people's unique genetic makeups. And then after 3 years, I started to stop learning. So I figured we're time to get this out there now. So anyways, to your point, after having done it thousands and thousands of times, I realized that everybody needs to go through the same process. First of all, there's 6 major systems. Everyone needs to go through executive function in the brain, how you think, how you perceive the world, and how the world perceives you. And if I have your DNA, I can describe your personality to a T without ever talking to you. I now know every neurochemical that's firing, to what degree, how do you clear it, how long does it last, how do you remember it? It's all coded in your DNA. Second is sleep. So if you're not sleeping, you're not recovering. Most of your detox, pathways are active in your sleep, and that's when you do this job. And so you have to be sleeping properly. Then there's diet and nutrition. At a macro level, so metabolism. Should I be keto? Should I be vegan? How much vitamin D do I need? How much zinc do I need? All those questions can be highly personalized and individual. Then there's chronic disease. So everything around identifying these red flags, like I see diabetes, I see breast cancer, I see cardiovascular disease. Now let's start digging deeper into why. Then we get into the why, number 5, which is cellular health. So detox pathways, methylation, anti-inflammatory pathways, antioxidation, so mitochondrial function, and everything that creates or doesn't create the good health of the cell. And lastly is everything around hormones, which there isn't a story that we tell that there isn't some hormone intervention needed to some level. And this is vastly ignored, especially when it comes to women's health. 65% of who we work on are women because they're so gaslit, I guess is the best word to use when it comes to medical practice of, you're just a man with no penis, here's a good protocol for you. No, that's what you research, but that doesn't mean it applies to a woman's menstrual cycle, which is a very different context, right? So having said all that, what did we learn? That's universal. Those are the 6 buckets where you do hyper-personalize and become bespoke. But everybody needs to start with their mind and trauma. I haven't met anyone that's on a healing journey, irrespective of where they're at, who they are, what level of career they have, that isn't holding on to some level of trauma where their body and their mind thinks that they're in a fight or flight and won't let them heal. And it is very binary. You're either in fight or flight or you're in rest or recovery. You can't do both, right? You can switch gears between both, but not both at the same time. So anyone that has a lingering story of I don't get it, I fixed this comes up and then it won't go away and I'm doing everything right, there's usually something to be said about what you're holding on to, right? And being in fight or flight. Then there isn't anyone that we deal with that doesn't need work on their gut. A few weeks ago, Dr. Gundry released his new book, Gut Check. So I interviewed him to help him talk about his book. And he is still, well, a lot of people don't know, he's still a practicing clinician. He works 6 days a week in the clinic, and he sees mostly cardiovascular patients, but he sees a lot of chronic disease stuff. And he was one of the first to start looking at the gut. And he said there's literally not one chronic disease patient where he has tested their gut where they don't have some form of leaky gut or gut dysbiosis. It's just directly connected, right? Then the third, which sort of envelopes multiple things, it is the silent killer, is everything around environmental health. So the thing that is flying under the radar is what is in your environment, mold, for example, the 144,000 chemicals that have been added to humanity since the 1970s that we don't know that we're breathing and eating. From your clothing to your cosmetics, your personal care products, your sunscreen. So everything that you're exposed to, your EMF, all of the Wi-Fi and digital toxicity that your body is being hit by, which is bringing every system down, which makes you more susceptible to disease, right? So that environmental health bucket is where the inflammation comes from, right? And then your gut gets disrupted. Then the trauma can't get fixed. And then the thing that you're actually dealing with, the fibromyalgia, the autoimmune condition, the breast cancer, is a combination of all this stuff and the body give it up, right? So that's kind of the journey that everyone now goes through when we work with them. And by the time we get through this stuff, we don't really need to deal with the chronic issue anymore because we've already figured out the root cause, often unintentionally. We're not even asking them what the problem is, right? We're saying, let's just work on cellular health, terrain medicine, getting your body to its best state. And guess what? It's already regenerative. It's already designed to heal. You just had some blocks that need to be removed.
Wow. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
A lot there. That it all dovetails. I'm looking at my notes here. Mind and trauma, fight or flight. I mean, we see so many people with mold-related illness. They're in constant fight or flight. They don't get better until that gets remedied. And even the mold exposure itself ends up being a trauma for many, right? And then their nervous system is just completely, just hyperreactive. And the gut health is interesting, of course, because so many people come to me and say, with a mycotoxin urine panel and say, I've got mold in my body. And I said, well, probably not. You probably have toxins in your body. And then they are sure that it's in their building. And sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. But if it's in your urine panel, it's in your food. And that's one of the big, I interviewed Dr. Mark Philaday at the Amen Clinic the other day at the summit. And he was the one who actually had Great Plains create the mycotoxin urine panel in the first place. And now he's trying to reel it back in because it's being so misused. And in our conversation, it was fascinating because we talked about environmental mold, where you're dealing with the VOCs, the musty smell, and of course the allergens and low amounts, very small amounts of the mycotoxins because they don't become airborne easily. But then the gut health issue, of course, which is a big deal for everybody. Anyone who's eating, conventional meats and dairy, anything that's in a box, a bag, any of the refined carbohydrates, any of the stuff that's, it's just our food system is so contaminated with mycotoxins, whacking out our guts. It's no surprise that this is a universal problem, right? So we're just getting, and then of course there's all the man-made chemicals. We really are dealing with kind of an overwhelming series of exposures. And you do such a great job of highlighting these things on your Instagram account. But it's a little overwhelming for a lot of people, especially if they're in fight or flight, right? So how do you work with someone who's in fight or flight and say, by the way, you got all these toxins to worry about? I mean, at some point, they've got to a lot of people shut down, don't they?
Yes, and so the expectation of like, fix me, understanding that if you truly want what we're saying, which here's the root cause, we can actually fix it as opposed to mask it. That's a 2-year journey.
Hey there, sorry to jump in here, but really important. At the end of this video, there's a link that gives you access to a bonus package we put together that has all sorts of great resources. Pro level notes, audio downloads, a fast start guide, as well as some additional resources from our speakers. You will not want to miss out on that. You can also find the link in the description below or at gotmoldsummit.com. So go claim yours today. Now back to the interview.
If you go to any functional medicine clinician, you have an autoimmune issue, an inflammation issue, yeah, you're going to feel a lot better in the first couple months because we're going to put the fire out. But to truly fix it, quote unquote, like it's gone and you're the best version of yourself, that is a 2-year plan. Not saying you need to work with me or anyone else for 2 years, but you need to get the information you yourself, not stop improving for 2 years. Once you've learned what the true root cause is. And what's overwhelming is everybody trying to just do everything all at once, right? Small steps, do one thing today. Right? Just turn the laptop off so you can sleep. That literally do one thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and in terms of the fight or flight, just so why is this happening? Why are people stuck? So if you look at the actual genetics of it, our genome takes a long time to change. In fact, my opinion is I have not seen evolution in the human genome. We've been the same. It's been about 250,000 years. We became who we are. We're cave people for most of that time. We don't really know how it happened. There was just kind of edit in the human genome, and we became intelligent and we could speak. And here we are, humanity, right? There's been no change. What we have is many genes have 3 or 4 potential different outcomes, and there's kind of this Russian roulette that goes on from generation to generation of what card did I get dealt, and that's it. And we keep interchanging between those same 3 or 4. So we have this thing called the epigenome, which epi means on top. So here's your genetics. They don't really change. They're just different options, and we keep trading cards of which option we get from our parents to our kids. Meanwhile, there's things that we need our children to adopt so that they can survive. Not so much anymore. The world is designed for, convenience and survival. But up until now, it was a big requirement where if there was battle, famine, something impactful, the epigenome would start triggering. So this expression of your genes. I have gene version A, which does like an 80% job, right? I now went through 2 years of famine. This gene is going to be turned on. The dial is going to be turned to 120% to give me what I need to deal with that. And guess what? It's going to be inherited for the next 7 generations. The thinking is that I can't edit my genome, but I can change the expression on this so that my children can also deal with where I live and the reality of my environment, and this may happen again. So when you have something like trauma, like a real trauma, car accident, fight, whatever, that epigenome kicks in and starts overexpressing certain coping mechanisms so that when that thing happens again, you're more risk adverse and you don't get burned twice. You're safe. Now put that in 2024, where everything is a constant stimulus and trauma. There's bills, there's emails, there's people, there's inflammatory toxins causing you internal inflammation. Like everything is a constant trigger. That expression doesn't turn off. And so even though you don't feel it, even though you may have forgiven and forgotten the thing, whatever it is, the epigenome didn't forget, because it doesn't know the difference between the thing and everything else going on. Your brain doesn't actually know what's happening. The thought that you have is not your brain telling you something, it's you telling your brain something. So your conscious thought is your conscious brain, you telling your subconscious what's going on, which then communicates back to your epigenome, which often keeps you stuck. It's also your gut and your heart, by the way. There's 40 million neural cells in your heart. There's neural cells in your gut. That intuition that we think is woo-woo is actually a form of thought. It's just not words, it's a feeling, right? The emotions form with that. So all of these feedbacks are constantly telling your brain what to do, which has no clue what's going on, which continues to trigger this flight or fight response. So reverse engineer, even just the awareness of that, for most people solves half the problem. Right? Once they start to see the world that way, they're like, oh, I get it. I see the trigger. I feel it now, right?
Sure.
But then there's work to be done, whether it's meditation. The opposite of stress and the antithesis is literally meditation. So that washing the inflammation of stress off of your cells is meditation. So there's things you can do also, but just awareness is a big, big deal.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and we could probably go down a huge deep dive into the microbiome and the gut health, how that rolls up with the gut brain. But we'll do that in another interview down the road. But when we start looking at the specifics around mold, how do our genetics affect our ability to deal with mold and other toxins?
So GSTP1 is your primary first-line defense of airborne inhalation-based toxins. So what you breathe, and the glutathione first-line defense is to prevent that nonsense from entering your bloodstream. Some people don't do that so well. A lot of people are doing well with this gene, like the GST1 that I'm missing for my gut is pretty common. GSTP1 is not so common, but when it is present, bad news, right? I walk into a factory, I walk into a basement, I walk into whatever, and the air quality is not 100%, I get a headache. I get a rash, right? No protection. Then there's a gene called GSTT1, which is sort of second line of defense. Once it's gotten in, how well do I remove it? And this is another gene where it's possible to have a copy number variation missing, which many people are. So if you have that combination, suboptimal minus 40 or minus 70% function of GSTP1 based on what version you have, combined with no GSTP1, mold is bad news, right? Now, the opposite is also true, where you have the good version of these genes, and you live in a moldy home, and you have no visceral response. So your body's dealing with it, and you're getting slowly sick over time. So we often tell these people that armor that you have can sometimes be bad news because you don't have the canary in the coal mine response to know what's going on. And so what is chronic disease? It takes years, sometimes a decade plus to develop. So for that person, it's like out of the blue, what just happened? Versus I walk into the room, I feel gross, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So two different versions of bad news, and you need to know which one you are to be able to handle your environment properly, right? For example, testing. The person that doesn't have the bad version of the genes needs regular testing. They should be testing for mold regularly because they themselves have no idea what's going on, right? Then there's a process called glucuronidation, which is not as spoken of when it comes to detox, but it's an important detox process, and is usually thought of in the context of hormones. It clears some toxic hormone metabolites, like some men make a testosterone metabolite called DHT, dihydrotestosterone, which is the Superman, manly man version. It gives you a ripped six-pack, burns all your muscle off your body, but it also kills your hair follicles and enlarges your prostate. It's toxic, right? Especially if you're not out there using it. Sitting on a laptop with DHT, you're going to get a prostate issue. So that's where glucuronidation is usually spoken of, but it also is highly implicit in the removal of mold. And so, but it's not spoken of because it's not considered a detox gene, but it is. Then there's methylation, which is, in a nutshell, anti-inflammatory response. So methylation, normally you hear of it as what is methylation? It's converting things. So you take a nutrient in and you convert it into the bioavailable active form. That's methylation. A methyl group is said to attach to something. It either converts it or it makes it water soluble so you can pee it out. If it's a toxin, it helps you get rid of it. But it also supports your anti-inflammatory response. So how efficiently are you fighting the fire? If your detox is medium and there's some stuff and you have a threat, now the cells are inflamed, how well are you putting out the fire? And if the methylation is doing good, now it's not only multiple genes making up a profile, it's multiple systems making up a profile, right? Methylation is also cellular signaling. So your mitochondria are constantly surveying the environment to know what's going on and signaling back to your body, watch out, right? I can sense somebody walking up behind me. That's my mitochondria surveying the environment. Your methylation genes, are responsible to take that signal and turn up or turn down gene expression to give you exactly what you need in that moment to cope with that problem. So if you walk into a moldy room, and your methylation doesn't work properly, there's a bit of a lag in kicking up the defenses to deal with the problem. And if you continue walking into the same room with mold and not testing and not knowing, over time, that's bad news, right?
Yep.
And of course, we talked about the gut. The last thing I would say is, particularly for women, very important to understand hormones. And why do two women walk into a room and have a different result? Often it's because the toxic hormones that they make are already putting them at the tipping point, and they just needed one more insult to take them over the edge, and that was the mold, right? And versus another woman who's doing fine, who's more hormone balanced and doesn't make toxic metabolites, can take a bit of a hit. We know that toxins are a total accumulative load question, right? What is all of what I'm dealing with versus just one thing? And when you add it all together, it's too much. And so women really need to understand what they're doing with hormones, because you may be more susceptible to everything because you yourself are making toxic hormones.
Man, there's a lot to unpack there. Before we talked about methylation, you used what was the?
Glucuronidation.
Can you spell that? Glucuronidation?
Yeah.
Or at least, or let's just say it a little slower, just like for our listeners.
Glucuronidation.
Glucuronidation. Okay.
Yeah. And the genes there are UGT-B17 and UGT-B15. And B17 is another one where you could have a copy number variation. Missing. Don't even have the gene. All right? UGT-B15 has a variant potential, but UGT-B17 has a potential for a copy number variation. And this is where, again, genetics, the very first thing you asked, most genetic reports won't tell you about this gene because the whole other test you have to run called copy number variations, right? And most genetic tests are designed for data collection. They're not designed to help you. It's a kind of a dirty secret of the industry where your DNA doesn't change. You've done a test, and then you're done. You never need to test again. And so the business model sucks because it's one time and you're done. And so every genetic testing company became a data selling business, because that's where the recurring business came from. And so the tests now got designed as the data that the pharma companies wanted to buy, as opposed to the insights that you need to be healthy. And so copy number variation is very important when it comes to dealing with mold and hormones. Doesn't really matter when you're trying to make a pill for dementia, right? When you're trying to mask the disease as opposed to remove the root cause, which is the opposite of, chemical medicine, right? So most genetic tests don't look for these things. It's not important for their data, but it is highly important when it comes to functional health.
No doubt about it. So, one of the things that you said is that when you've got two people that may have the same exposure, but they're having completely different symptoms, where one person seems to be fine because they happen to have the sort of the genetic armor, so to speak, and then you've got the other people that are immediately symptomatic. A long time ago, I had this epiphany that the people who actually respond more quickly, that actually show symptoms quickly, actually have a superpower, because they're being exposed to something that's bad for everyone, and they just happen to get the signal faster. And so then they end up being able to modify their environment or leave the environment so as to reduce exposure, which of course is better for their health. The person who's being exposed to that same toxin that doesn't have that response has a sort of false sense of security. But like kryptonite, it weakens everyone, even if you think you're Superman, right? So,
yep. And we've seen a cultural shift where we used to call that profile weak, right? We used to point fingers at that person. We used to not believe them.
Yep.
And now we look to that person for advice. There's been a complete shift in how we think about our body and culture. Again, what the world has went through in the last few years, there's been an awakening, right? And I see it. I see it in the people that now show up for support. Used to show up as confused, traumatized. Their family members like, here's the problem. You're the problem person, right? Please fix them. Now it's like they're the wellness guru of the family, and so that's exactly what it was meant to be. Every genetic variant is either a superpower or a crutch, depending on the context. What's the question? You have to understand the tool you've been given and what was the purpose, and think about what the right context is.
No, that's very well said. I mean, my own story, which you've heard several times, is that I was severely allergic to everything and falsely diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. And when I moved out of the moldy house, all my symptoms went away. I'm no longer allergic to anything. It's been, a point of curiosity for many of the allopathic physicians that I've known over the years.
Yeah.
But now what you're saying in the context of the genetic story, it just makes a ton of sense. Now, what you also talked about was the mitochondria constantly scanning the environment. There's beautiful work done around this cell danger response. The mitochondria is either making energy or cellular defense. It's either doing one or the other, can't do both, right? So when it's in cellular defense, you're fatigued. And end up with all, whether ME or chronic fatigue syndrome or just unable to move through the world in your normal vibrant self. And so this is really a sort of a binary thing. As most of these things are just switches, essentially, right? These genetic switches. So are there therapies to deal with some of these missing genes, or is that just the way it is?
So it is who you are. And now you need to identify habits that get you to where you want to be. Meaning that you're not going to change your genome. It's the cards you've been dealt. You first of all need to understand the purpose. How is it a superpower and how is it a problem? Because every genetic variant is both. And then there's days where you don't want to do anything about it. Suppose it's a mood and behavior thing. For example, you may have a neurochemical that causes you to bind trauma. Your adrenaline response. Some people, the way they experience adrenaline is more IQ and intellectual and information. For some people, it's more EQ. They actually bind the feeling along with the information. And when something like that happens again, it expresses as trauma. Like, it's as if this is a continuation of last time, right? They remember the feeling. And so that thing is an incredible superpower when it comes to EQ. If you were a clinician, if you were needing to bond with people, right? If you need to read the room and meet people where they're at, it is a horrible thing if you were a soldier going to battle, right? Where everything reminds you of the last pain. So knowing that, firstly, like what is that context that I was designed for? How is this a superpower? How is it a crutch? So that you know when to turn it on or off. Now, how do you turn it on or off? It's a combination of environment, nutrition, and lifestyle, which is here's the inputs that if I were to add them to my bad genetic profile, in a certain context it's bad, in a certain context it's good, that would equal this net result. So if you look at, for example, a woman that does make too much estrogen, and she does make toxic estrogen, which we can learn genetically, it may be good for hair and skin. She may have beautiful hair and skin, and she may have that, voluptuous Instagram body without doing the work, because of the estrogen. But when it comes to the birth control pill, she's going to feel horrible because she's already overly estrogenized. And then you add more, top of funnel, right? And you're overloading the system. It may lead to, on the side of that birth control pill box, it says risk of stroke. And why is it not absolute? Why is it risk? Because certain women are not estrogen dominant and they're not estrogen toxic. They're more androgenized, right? And it's not an overload for them. And so knowing what are the sort of, and this better than anyone, there's no detoxification without removing the toxin to begin with, right? You're just kind of throwing a water out of a boat. You got to plug the holes, right? So step one is identifying what are the threats, and then fortifying that broken biology with things like supplementation, the right food, the right movement. What are your environment, nutrition, lifestyle choices? And for this type of profile, going back to this woman, it may be, for example, broccoli sprouts, rich in something called sulforaphane. Sulforaphane removes toxic hormone metabolites. It may be breath work, because breath work is good for mitochondrial function, and antioxidation is a pathway to remove toxic hormone metabolites. It's also, you got to think about your Teflon coated frying pan. You got to think about plastics. You got to think about yoga pants. Everywhere where you're getting hormone disrupting chemicals entering your body. Right? So it's a combination of all this stuff. So ultimately, you figure out what bucket you're in, what biology doesn't work, how is that good for me in certain contexts. I want to be able to use this tool. How is that bad for me in some other context? And then the context is going to drive the answer to what you just said. What is causing things? It's whatever's in that context, environment, the nutrition, lifestyle, and you can start to turn the dial on things, and kind of come up with your own individual, like you said, bespoke plan for longevity.
Hey there, sorry to jump in here, but really important. At the end of this video, there's a link that gives you access to a bonus package we put together that has all sorts of great resources. Pro level notes, audio downloads, a fast start guide, as well as some additional resources from our speakers. You will not want to miss out on that. You can also find the link in the description below or at gotmoldsummit.com. So go claim yours today. Now back to the interview. Now it gets a little complex with some of these things because certain people certain people may have a genetic issue with glutathione, right? Or specifically with supplementation with sulfur-based compounds, right? So when you get into this idea of, well, I've got this, I've got to improve my detox pathways, I've also got to facilitate these things, help push these things through. Getting to understand what you can use and what you can't use is an important part of this conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. So the GSTT1 gene we talked about, I can't tell you how many people we've dealt with. In our research, we dealt with some pretty intense cases because we kind of worked with a bunch of clinics and said, give us the person you can't figure out. Whoever's stuck, we will try and get them unstuck. If we can't do that, what's the value to all this? So we dealt with all these complex cases, and we often found that, the world already understands detox. We didn't create this. We just refined it a little bit. And we got these patients that were just feeling horrible who just went through a detox protocol. They should have felt better. Then we realized, okay, you don't detox well, this master antioxidant, maybe you need a little bit more, and they're given a glutathione IV without the GSTT1 gene instructing the glutathione on what to do. And now not only is it binding onto toxins, but it's also binding onto minerals and nutrients they actually need and removing those also. And they literally went into malnutrition and were become bedridden.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a question of not everything is for everyone. One of the major things that helped me was B12. It seems so insignificant, but I very specifically need to take adenosine, which is a version of B12 that's not common. When you go to any stores, typically methylcobalamin is the typical B12 you get. Adenosine is a unique version, and I very specifically need to take it under my tongue sublingually. Why? Because genetically, my ancestors didn't eat beef. They ate more goat and sheep, and they ate a methylated version of B12. That's why grandma says chew your food, because you're literally absorbing nutrients while you chew. And that one thing made a big difference for my skin. The eczema and some of those other issues I had. I just had I knew I had a B12 deficiency because I did a live blood cell analysis, which is literally looking at your blood cells under a microscope, and they told me there's no B12 here, right?
Wow.
So, and I was eating beef, so didn't get it. So things like that. It's like not taking the wrong thing, which can potentially cause harm, and also being hyper specific about what the right thing is.
So what kind of testing is available to figure this stuff out?
So if you go to my website, kashifkhanofficial.com, you'll see what's called the DNA 360. You could also go to our corporate site, the DNAcompany.com. The difference between the two are the company that I founded and created is called the DNA Company. You can buy tests if you buy it from my website. I sometimes have coaching programs and events and stuff that you can participate in, so you'll end up on my mailing list. So kashifkhanofficial.com, which is also my Instagram handle if you just want to learn more about environmental toxins and all of what we've learned in our clinic that's making people sick. And it's called the DNA 360. From there, you'll learn all these functional pathways. Now, some people need more support. If somebody is acutely ill and needs, intervention, we have clinicians, MDs, doctors, myself, I coach people also. We can help you. But for the most part, it's like, I want to be the best version of myself. The test is designed to give you that information.
Beautiful, beautiful. So when it comes down to, backpedaling a little bit, you hear a lot of people talk about MTHFR And you also hear a lot of people talk about the HLA, the genotype, right? Especially with the people that have been through the Schumacher protocols.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so that goes back to genetics, which is what gene can we point our finger at, right? And those are both examples of that, where yes, there's some value and meaning there, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. So MTHFR, which is this well-spoken of methylation gene, it's a central starring character of methylation. And doctors will order a methylation test and literally tell you about one gene called MTHFR and then give you some information based on that. So it's kind of like I looked at your tire and told you about your car, right? There's a lot of other stuff going on. So I can't pass a judgment. And you may have the worst tire, and I'll give you really bad news on that tire. But you might have 3 other really great tires, and you can drive for another 120 kilometers, and you wouldn't even know, right? So methylation is a cascade of multiple genes that literally are doing a bit of a baton pass. So a job happens, baton pass, next gene does a job. Baton pass, next gene does a job. It's like a relay race. And MTHFR is in the middle of that, doing a big part of the work. And so you have to, suppose your MTHFR is off. What do? What's the intervention? You have to then look at everything else to know what to do. For me, FUT2, it's a methylation gene, told me that I need sublingual B12. For me, MTR and MTRR told me that I need adenosine, not methylcobalamin, which I didn't even need to intervene with my MTHFR. These are the things that were causing MTHFR to not do its job properly. Then there's a gene called SHMT1. So the typical answer to MTHFR is go get some folate. So folate is what was meant to be in our food. It's not. It's removed because the bran for most of our foods are removed because it rots and we need shelf life, apparently. And so we no longer have folate. And so it's been replaced with something called folic acid, which is a synthetic version, which if your MTHFR is off, you cannot process efficiently. And it will literally make you feel bad, even though it's supposed to make you feel good. And so you may need folate. But if your SHMT1 gene is off, which works side by side with MTHFR, then you need something called folinic acid. You have to be very specific. And even the folate may not help you that much, right? So again, it's just being very personalized and individual, and you don't know what to do until you look at it in the context of biology, which is the system and cascade and not individual single genes.
So the same thing with the HLA genotype?
Same thing. Yeah, same thing. It points to risk. It tells you red flag, but you still don't know what to do.
Got it. So what kind of testing is coming around the corner? Where do you see this? Where do you see this going?
Well, beyond testing, I think the therapeutics, what you're going to see is gene editing. In fact, we're already there. There's companies today that are building gene editing. The first gene editing product got approved by the FDA last year for a rare eye condition. So now the question is, how do you get your 50 trillion cells to adopt that gene edit head to toe so the whole body's doing the same thing? So they've been able to isolate an eyeball and get an eyeball to reverse a condition because there's a broken code which leads to a genetic condition. And if you edit the genome, splice that broken code out and replace it with good code, all of a sudden your body starts doing the job properly and you don't have that condition anymore. Wow. So that's here now, but it's not here mainstream and accessible. There's a gene editing treatment for dementia, which is being trialed right now, but it costs $1 million a dose. Wow. So once it gets down to 10, 20K, which it's going to get there, you'll start to see, I think Goldman Sachs said that the genetic therapeutic industry is going to be a $4.8 trillion industry by 2030. And our entire healthcare industry is $4 trillion, right? Because it's like, okay, just go fix the root cause. Finally, right? We're finally going to have medicine that's fixing the root cause. But again, you just have to be careful because now all of a sudden you feel like you're fortified to go start abusing your body. You still have to be careful in today's reality, but that's what's coming.
Fascinating. So to sort of summarize this, and please correct me if I misspeak on any of this. The genetic blueprint that you have is a framework that you can work within. It's got this incredible array of switches that are impacted by our diet, lifestyle, nutrition, and thoughts, essentially, right? And so what we can do is first figure out what that framework looks like, what those pathways, how they're currently how it's currently set up, and then modify the external environment best we can, and then of course optimize our internal one so that we can reduce the risks associated with these predispositions. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, exactly it. There's millions of jobs happening in your body, and your genome will tell you how well you're doing those jobs or how poorly. And now you know what's a threat and what's not a threat. And you know what you need to be doing, what you need to not be doing. And it really, in its complexity, it's really that simple.
And when I talk to people, as you've heard me say many times, it's air, food, and attitude mostly. Yeah. So if you get your indoor environment straight, which is an area where we have enormous potential for control, which is driving force behind this summit, and then food, which is the sort of the missing conversation when it comes to mold exposure, because so few people realize what we're dealing with in terms of the mycotoxins that are in our food. Of course, all the other pollutants as well, right? So a fresh, local, seasonal diet with grass-fed and pastured meats. This is good for you anyway, but it will happen to also reduce a lot of the risk factors with the environmental pollutants, microbial as well as man-made, and then attitude. You bring up the mind and trauma aspect of this, which I think is so fundamental, because I don't see people get better until they get past some of these things, and acceptance is a big part of it. And then also, just making peace, forgiveness. But then there's this other piece, which is getting your nervous system reordered, right? Getting things calmed down again. So now this is fascinating stuff. So now I think you have a little bit of a bonus for our listeners here. Am I right?
Yeah, if you want to learn more. So this is why I wrote the DNA Way, because I found that everything out there about genetics was overly academic and heavy and boring. And it was not what I needed to know. I needed to know everything we've been talking about today, the actual insight. So I wrote a book called The DNA Way. It came out last year for this purpose, just to help the world learn. And so the publisher has allowed me to offer a free chapter so people can start that journey of learning, right? And continue from there. So we'll make sure everybody gets that.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so now, where can people find you? You mentioned KashifKhanOfficial.com. And what's your website?
That's my website. It's KASHKHAN official.com. You can find me there, email me through there. You can find me on Instagram. Same thing, KASHKHAN official. There's no .com on Instagram. So that's my handle, and you can find me there. Send me a message if you like. Send me an email through there. I see everything. And you'll also learn a lot if you go there. We're constantly putting out what we see in the clinic that's the root cause, and try to educate people on what they need to be sort of warned of.
Beautiful. Well, I'll tell you what, I came here ready to learn, and I came away much more well-informed about this subject, and I'm grateful for the work that you do, and I'm grateful to call you my friend, Cash. Thank you so much for
Pleasure, man. Great being here.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Hey, before you go, in case you haven't done it already, go to gotmoldsummit.com to claim your bonus package today. It's filled with all sorts of great stuff. Audio downloads, pro-level notes, fast start guide, and some additional gifts from our speakers, all absolutely free, so you won't want to miss out on that. Again, go to gotmoldsummit.com to claim your bonus package. You can also find the link in the description below.